You're listening to the Connection Care Community Podcast, a podcast designed to help you understand your body more deeply and feel more confident navigating your hormones, cycle, and fertility. Each episode offers grounded, research-informed guidance and integrative tools to support hormone health, embodied awareness, and informed choice. If you're seeking clarity, connection, and a more trusting relationship with your body, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Here's your host, the founder of Connection Care Therapy, Majida.
Hello and welcome to the Connection Care Community Podcast. My name is Majida, and today we're talking about something that feels really important to name clearly. Fertility awareness is more than just fertility. Your cycle is a window into your whole body health, not just your reproductive future. Because when most people hear the phrase fertility awareness, they immediately think of a very small set of things: preventing pregnancy, trying to conceive, timed intercourse. And while fertility awareness can, in fact, support all of those goals, that was never meant to be its only role. Fertility awareness is actually a language of the body. It's a way of understanding your internal world with more clarity, with more compassion, and this is a biggie, with more context. The longer you observe your cycle, the more obvious it becomes that your cycle is a reflection of your whole body health. So let's go ahead and dive into this topic. One of the things that I oftentimes say in my work is that the menstrual cycle is deeply interconnected with almost every major system of the body. If we're talking about your nervous system, we're talking about your hormones, or we're talking about your gut, or your immune system, or your metabolic health. When you learn to chart your cycle, you're not just collecting data. You're actually watching how the body adapts to stress, how it responds to nourishment, how it's communicating its needs. And I want to make this real by sharing a few examples from my practice. I always like to bring this into what does this actually mean when we're talking about real people, real lives, real bodies, right? So I once worked with a client who truly believes that she handles stress really well. I know this story personally myself, right? You get so used to a certain level of stress that you're like, oh no, I handle stress extremely well. I run a business, right? I got kids, I am active, and I don't feel overwhelmed, right? That was this client's experience. However, when the client started charting, when we started looking at her charts, a very different story started to unfold. Ovulation, right, starting there, which was happening consistently in the middle of her cycle, right, had previously been happening consistently in the middle of her cycle as she had picked up more things in her life and was being exposed to certain stressors. Mind you, she was handling them well. However, what we started to notice was that her ovulation started creeping to being later and later and later in her cycle. Her luteal phase has started to shorten. Right? Her temperatures, her shifts became less robust. There's a technique called the cover line. Her temps post-ovulation started to hover, right, above this cover line. Her body, right, long story short, and this is for people who might be new to the world of charting, what this information was telling us was that her body was signaling depletion. That months before she was ever consciously aware that she felt burnt out, sure enough, a couple of months later, she hit a wall, right? But her cycles has shown that before she had experienced and integrated the fullness of the exhaustion. Her chart had been warning her for a minute, right? A minute prior to her mind catching up. So this is one of the most powerful aspects of fertility awareness. It shows us patterns sometimes quite early, right, before symptoms become diagnoses. Another area where this shows up really clearly is actually in sleep. So progesterone Progesterone, just to give a little bit of a framework around cycle, right? Education. The first part of our cycle is dominated by estrogen. The second part of our cycle is dominated by progesterone. During the second part of our cycle, which is dominated by progesterone, we might notice, if we're tracking our cycles, that our relationship to sleep, to rest, to slowing down can oftentimes be quite different than it is in the first part of our cycle. And that's because progesterone plays a huge role in sleep quality. When you track your sleep alongside your cycle, you start to get some really clear patterns that can oftentimes jump out. Many people sleep more deeply in the early luteal phase when progesterone is strong, and then they notice sometimes lighter or more disruptive sleep when progesterone begins to drop closer to menstruation. That's not an uncommon pattern. So I had this one client who had been labeled as having chronic insomnia for years. Nothing was working for this client consistently. When we start to overlay her sleep with her cycle, what we saw was that she actually was sleeping pretty well during certain phases, and then really was struggling in the days before her period. So that pattern pointed us towards hormonal support rather than generic sleep protocol support. Once we addressed some of the underlying hormonal concerns that she was having, her sleep began to normalize. So years of frustration, right? Once we understood what was happening in terms of timing and cycle and the relationship between cycle and sleep, years of frustration began to resolve. We began to support her in improving this issue that had been bothering her, for not just bothering her, but really disrupting her life for some time. Digestion is another area. If you are not new to this podcast, you know that I talk about the importance of gut health, and how much, especially those of us who are living in certain types of societies. I'll just leave it at that, leave it quite general. But societies that really prioritize work and hustle far more than rest and repose, right? Digestion, for most of us, is going to be a foundational concern. Hormones directly affect things like gut motility, inflammation, appetite, of course, and the gut microbiome itself, right, can be influenced by hormones. This is why some people notice looser stools during certain phases of their cycle, or constipation during other phases, or bloating, right? Anybody out there have experienced bloating during certain stages of their cycle that tends to worsen during specific points in their cycle? These symptoms are not accidental, right? When these symptoms are tracked with the cycle, they can stop feeling so random and mysterious, and they can oftentimes even become predictable enough to become manageable and supported. I worked with someone who was told that she had IBS, but no one explained, right, why her symptoms would flare up specifically when they did. And what charting revealed was a strong hormonal pattern. So again, this was another situation that, yes, supporting the gut, right, was very important, but supporting her overall, some other aspects, key and foundational aspects of her hormonal experience was very, very important to supporting her digestive, her IBS diagnosis and overall digestion. So the diagnosis wasn't wrong. I want to be clear with that. It just was not the whole story. And if we hyper focus on just one piece, then we may miss the opportunity to actually holistically support a person in foundational and sustainable root level relief. So there's also emotional health. Hormones shape neurotransmitters, right? They influence how we experience things like motivation, right? And connection and sensitivity, confidence, introspection. Hormones and the relationship between neurotransmitters is actually a very strong one. When you understand this, emotional shifts during your cycles stop feeling like, oh, there's something personally wrong with me, or I'm having some kind of a personality failure, right? I charted my own emotional patterns every cycle, and it became very, very clear when I'm at my most creative, or my most energetic, or my most social, or my most inward or sensitive. For example, it's not a good idea for me, right? Personally, Majida, to record these podcasts during my luteal phase. It is, especially when I'm in deep luteal, like that cycle day 20, 21. It just, I do not have the natural flow within my system to say, hey, let me put certain things out in the world. So I'm able to then be very clear, no when's the best time to record my podcast. I'm going to do that during the first stage of my cycle when I do have a lot more energy and creativity, and my flow is just like there and naturally able to access, instead of me climbing up a hill, swimming upstream, trying to activate something that just doesn't feel aligned. Okay, so none of these states, right? My luteal phase is not a problem. My low energy during that time is not a problem. It's information. One client came to me who was had been through certain experiences and certain types of supports where she was clear that she had a serious mood disorder because she would have certain emotional highs and certain emotional lows. Not questioning any previous diagnosis at all. What we simply did was I taught her the charting practice, and then she learned how to integrate that into her life. And what she noticed was that these emotional shifts had a clear connection with hormonal changes that she was experiencing, that they were particularly intensified by low progesterone. So my role on her team was to support her in that aspect of, one, understanding her cycle, and two, understanding how to support her hormonal profile so that these swings would soften, right? Not, again, at throwing out any kind of advice, perspective, or diagnosis, but to make sure that we're adhering to any kind of medical advice. And right, there are ways to work integratively, to understand your experience integratively, so that your experience of relief can be more holistic and more sustainable. So fertility awareness can also reveal things like thyroid imbalance concerns, adrenal stress concerns, blood sugar dysregulation, systemic inflammation, oftentimes things that conventional labs may not as readily flag as being abnormal. I really, at this point in my work, can't tell you how many times a chart has guided me towards running certain functional lab testing that then uncovered something a client was told was normal, was fine. The chart is not, in and of itself, does not issue diagnoses, right? But it can certainly be a profound tool of giving clues as to where to look. Something else that really does shift when people start to practice this body of work called fertility awareness is that it can oftentimes become less about collecting data and more about forming a relationship. If you've followed me on this podcast for a minute, you've heard me say this quite often. And what I mean by that is that the charting practice can become a daily moment of checking in with oneself instead of just pushing through or pushing aside. It can become a way of noticing how quickly stress can show up, and then supporting the system and resolving that. It can support us in seeing what habits actually support versus which ones are quietly draining. It can, and this is one that I'm a big advocate for, right? It can support us in recognizing when a boundary needs to change. Okay? So the cycle can become a kind of personal, individualized wellness dashboard. Instead of guessing what our body needs, now you have a roadmap, right? A roadmap to support you in that. So if this is all new to you, I want to emphasize something really important. You don't need to do this perfectly. You don't need to fancy technology. Once you learn the charting practice, it's actually one of the most affordable health supports that you will have in your toolkit. And also, to be very, very clear, you absolutely do not need to start with tracking everything at once. I have other podcasts that really talks where I talk about how to simplify this practice, how to make it comfortable and integrated into your life. And also, don't be shy about working with someone, right? Even basic charting, when paired with curiosity and consistency, can yield some profound insights. However, getting started can kind of sometimes be like, where do you even begin? Or is it, can be a chore. So whether it's through courses or consults or deeper resources like things that I have both on my Substack as well as on my website, I've linked all of this, a bunch of information on my Substack of links and articles and places where you can start. Just don't be shy to reach out for support, right, in starting this journey. I started learning. I was self-taught in the beginning, and then I when I started to actually say, like, let me go ahead and work with a fertility awareness educator and kind of like fine-tune my practice, I realized that yes, I learned a lot on my own, and you can learn a lot on your own, and I encourage you to, but there is really, really nothing like doing this work in community. This work was built to be done in community, and one person sharing their chart with another person and being able to have another set of eyes on your experience. So I really do encourage that there's no need to do this work in isolation. Don't be shy to reach out, right? Get some support. I am definitely here if you want to chat about that some more. So, leaving today's podcast with a reflection. I'm curious, what if paying attention to your cycle wasn't about any kind of control with your body or over your body, but it was about learning to collaborate with it? What if your cycle wasn't something to manage or to override, but it was something for you to listen to? I'm curious whether or not you have any contemplations on that at all. I offer that fertility awareness at its core is a practice of relationship, a relationship with your body, with your rhythms, with your health over the long arc of your life. And that's what makes it so much more than a fertility tool. It's that as well. And again, is so much more. So thank you, as always, for joining me here today. I love spending time sharing this information with you, and I do hope that as you slow down and have a moment to listen, that you maybe learned something or had some kind of takeaway today. Again, don't be shy to reach out and say hello. If you'd like to continue exploring the full article and all of the resources, live over on my Substack, and you can also check out my website as well. I have tons of resources there. So I will chat with you in the next podcast. I look forward to it. And as always, stay connected.
That does it for this episode of the Connection Care Community Podcast with Majida. Thank you so much for listening. We hope you're leaving with a fresh perspective on your body and overall well-being, along with practical tools you can integrate into daily life. The support doesn't stop here. Be sure to connect with us online at connectioncaretherapy.com for more resources to guide you on your journey. You can also find us on Substack and connect with Majida on Instagram at Majida Sai'da. Remember to rate, review, and share this podcast. And most importantly, stay connected.